Hey there guys, and welcome back. So, if you're watching this live, you may notice that we were a little bit late, and that's because I was trying to rectify this situation we've got here. I don't have very many options for mounting the camera at the moment. Having a better camera mount is something that is on the list of projects to do. That may need to be moved up if I keep on doing big projects like this. This is the camera angle you're going to get for this project. So I had a very busy week this week and therefore did not get much work done on the other projects. However, this is one that I had in progress and just required me going back to work and finishing it up late on Tuesday night. So this is officially finished. It looks like crap though, because there were a number of things that went wrong, and that's what we're here to talk about. So this is a jigsaw table, a jigsaw jig table. I don't know what exactly you want to call it. It's a very simple design. It's obvious how you put it together basically, but I went through a few different design options that I looked at, and I decided at the end of the day to keep it simple, and then I screwed up. So that's what we're talking about here. This slot right here is obviously where the blade comes through. This is a metal sheet, 3/16. I wanted it to be heavy, and it's one of these deals where I always underestimate how heavy 3/16 is, just because I'm used to lifting significantly larger pieces of 3/16, and therefore when I look at a piece this big, which is, I actually, off the top of my head, I can't remember what size I ended up with. Give me half a second. I have the CAD up for later when we hop over to Fusion in just a second. So let me just get the measurements really quick. So it's about a foot square. So this is about a foot square is what I ended up with. And I was like, a foot square, that's real small. It's going to be real light. And therefore I didn't go down to 1/8 material. Frankly, I probably should have just gone with the 1/8 sheet. However, there is one more reason why I didn't, why 3/16 was slightly more preferable. And that is because, if we flip this over, here is the jigsaw. Here's how it's mounted, and as you can see, there's bolts running through here. So, now that I've shown you that, maybe you notice where I welded the heads of the bolts through the plate. That's how I ended up going about this. There were several options. This was the first major disaster point on this build, which is why it looks like crap, and I haven't bothered making it look nice, because I will be redoing this at some point. However, this is perfectly functional, and therefore, and the second thing being is that, frankly, large pieces of scrap metal like this are pretty precious for me. I don't get very many pieces this large, so I want to get some use out of it before I switch it up and go another route. However, that is something that screwed up, is I put the holes for the bolt heads in here and then realized I undersized it after I cut the whole entire plate, which was a serious problem. So at that point, I was trying to get the project done as quickly as possible, and I didn't take a second to stop and think. The obvious solution, having the bolt heads too big for the holes, would have been actually to grind down the bolt heads, to fit into the holes. It's a much more difficult, especially after plasma cutting. Plasma cutting tends to harden the edges, so it's much more difficult after plasma cutting to open up the holes to fit the bolt heads, which is why I didn't think of it, or why I didn't even consider it, rather. But it would have been very easy just to take the bolts over and grind the edges down on the bolts so that they would fit into the holes. I didn't do that, however. So what I ended up doing is I pushed the whole bolts so that the bolt heads were on top of the plate, welded it as best as I could, getting penetration into the plate, and then ground off the bolt heads, and then added some more welds, etc., 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 tried to fix things. There's one or two on the legs that I think are still a little loose, but this whole entire frame for the legs is one piece at this point, so it's not that big of a deal. Otherwise, continue to flip over. These plates right here, it's held down with two plates running along the bracket that is normal on the bottom of the jigsaw. I'll talk more about that bracket when we get over to the CAD, just because I had other plans that I didn't end up using, but like I said, we will talk about that. We'll address that when we get there. So otherwise, obviously just some plates. I have used this, for the record. Oh, actually, you know what? I guess the first thing I should have said is, why the heck do I even have this in the first place? I was so excited to talk about how horribly everything blew up here that I totally skipped over that part. So I have this because, frankly, and I'm noticing I'm peaking a little bit, so let me move the microphone back a little bit. So I noticed that, I made this because, frankly, I don't have a good way to quickly cut stuff down, small stuff especially, down. It's just not something that I have, tools that I have available here at home, which is where I do most of my projects. And I have absolutely no capacity to have a large table saw or a large bandsaw in my current living conditions. So I needed something small that I could cut small things down with, and therefore I got a jigsaw. The other reason why I ended up with a jigsaw is that I have been looking at various projects that a jigsaw would actually be the correct tool for. So one of those things, those may come up. The jigsaw will be handy otherwise. And like I said, at this point now I have an effective, a decent enough equivalent to a bandsaw, a vertical bandsaw, that I can use to trim parts down and whatnot. So that was the whole entire point why I was building this. So anyway, in this particular build, I got these two plates holding the jigsaw down. It's one of these things where, frankly, when you're cutting, you see this little bit of wobble that I'm getting right here. I actually do not notice that at all when I've used it, flipped it over, and used it with pieces on the top plate. I haven't noticed any wobbling at all from that. It's actually worked quite well. So one of these deals where I'm actually, half me thinks that this, just because I don't see the wobble so much in the plates, is actually the jigsaw itself, where the thin metal bracket connects to the plastic, is where I think that jiggle comes from. But the point being is that there's nothing particularly wrong with that. Like, it's not impacting, as far as I can tell, my usage of the device. Now the legs. My CAD called for 2x4s, which are obviously 1.5 inches by 3.5 inches because wood. So that's what it was designed for. That's what the CAD was designed for. I ended up grabbing pallet wood, and pallet wood is, I guess, 1.5 by 3.5, I guess, is what it ends up being nominally, because it measures 1 by 3 actual size, actual dimensions. So obviously that was a 1/2 inch smaller in all dimensions, and one of these deals, I made do with what I got. It doesn't look the prettiest, and frankly, you'll notice these holes around here. I tried just driving some deck screws I had sitting around from the last pallet project in to put these together. It was a pain in the butt, A. B, I have some nails, as you can see, in here, which were getting in the way in some places. C, getting the drill gun in. Let me get my hand on this side so you can actually see. You can imagine me getting the gun in at this angle, trying to drive deck screws into this. So while I more or less did get them all in, it was frankly messy and nothing was really lined up well. So I took them all back out and just used wood glue to put the frame together. And it's one of those things, wood glue is good enough. But as I've stated before, this is obviously not sanded or any kind of finish on it, because by the time I got to that point, well, actually, you know what? The sanding would have happened after I ensured that this jigsaw wasn't in the right position and I didn't need to change anything like that and change the frame or something like that. And that is the next part I'm getting to here. So I'll go ahead and explain that. So I got the frame onto the bolts that came through to support the legs. That was simply a matter of sticking the frame on top of the bolts, hitting it with a hammer really quick to mark the spot, and then drilling it out. Again, I've got random nails that I had just sawn off the pallet board sticking through here. So in a couple of places, my drill holes to attach the bolts to are not straight, and in which case, as you can see from the front here, you see how I have a little gap on this side. So the whole entire frame is not quite square, but it doesn't necessarily matter because we're only working on the top surface. So this I then at that point mounted to make sure everything was working. I already have these legs hammered onto here with the holes obviously drilled. I had considered like cutting a slot in here to put a captured nut, or not necessarily captured, but to put a nut and then to tighten the nut down onto the bolts. I decided this was never coming apart to begin with, so I wasn't too concerned about actually fastening the bolts to the wood. So that's why they're basically just doweled in, and like the bolt is basically just acting as a dowel. So this got into place, third segue out of the way, and I realized that in my CAD I had marked the front of the plate, so the part all the way. Let me see if I can get some better lighting in here. All right, we'll put like this. All right, so the front of the plate is all the way right here. Yeah, sorry, I'm looking at the camera while I'm trying to do this. So front of the plate is right here, but the saw blade is recessed back from the front of the plate. I only had in my CAD the place where the front of the plate was marked because I had different plans originally. And that meant that my hole on the front, and now I will go ahead and flip this back up. Sorry for hitting the mic. My hole, you'll notice that it is right here right now, but you'll see a whole bunch of weld right here. And that is because this is where the hole used to be. So I cut all the way back. I basically started back here where I had a hole, then cut out this whole entire square, and then made sure I knew exactly where the saw blade was coming through, okay? And then refilled in and re-welded all the holes. So that was a bit annoying, but again, at this point, you know, the second that I saw that the saw blade was not lined up coming through the plate, and by not lined up, I mean I literally could not put the saw blade through the plate. I fitted it without the saw blade first because I figured one of those things, if anything happened, it would just get in the way. But point being, at this point, I just kind of filled it back in with metal and welded it, and that is where we're at. Now, the last thing, the last disaster on this build is while I was cutting that plate out in order to get the saw blade in the correct position, the idler wheel in the back here that holds that supports the jigsaw, so the jigsaw blade, let me slide you over here. Jigsaw blade goes up and down, right? But you cut forward with it. So it's going up and down, but you cut forward, which means that all the material is pushing it back like this and wants it to snap, right? While I was cutting that plate, I don't know what it is. It's most likely an E-ring, a retaining ring, possibly a cotter pin. Whatever used to be there was no longer there. The pin came out, the idler wheel bearing, whatever you want to call it, is plastic, so I don't want to call it a bearing, but technically speaking you could call it a bearing. That idler bearing that was supporting the back end of this saw blade popped out, at which point I snapped the saw blade, and then I was like, oh well, maybe I was just being too aggressive. I tried it again, snapped another saw blade, and then took a second and realized, oh crap, there's parts missing here. I did find the idler wheel, I did find the pin that holds it together, however I could not find whatever small E-ring or cotter pin was holding this whole entire thing together, which means that I couldn't put it back together. So, one of those things. This project actually would have been done for last weekend. However, I did not have my bolt kit with me at work. At work, we use mostly very large bolts. I mean, not very, very large, but, anything over a 1/4 inch. So anything under a 1/4 inch is obviously very small for me. 1/4 inch is the absolute smallest, and we only use those sparingly. For the most part, we use 3/8 and 1/2 inch and occasionally 3/4. But point being is that I needed a 4mm bolt, as it turns out. One of those things brought my bolt kit in. Did not have it at work, so that was waiting till I got the bolt kit in. Repaired the saw. The 4mm bolt, like I said, went through. Technically right now I have it running with just the bolt because I didn't bring a lock nut with me. I forgot to bring lock nuts with me, and therefore I tried a regular nut. The regular nut came free. However, the 4mm bolt is not rattling out of the hole that it's split through, the through slot that it's inside. So it's one of those things. Until that 4mm bolt actually slides out, I don't think I'm going to bother doing anything with it, because I did all the rest of the cutting on to adjust the slot in the top of the case, in the top of the plate rather. and it did not at any point come anywhere near falling out. Like, it didn't seem to move at all. So since that bolt doesn't seem to be moving, I'm not going to potentially break anything. So that is everything that went wrong with this model, and the reason why this model is not going to look particularly good in the future, because in the future it will be replaced after I get, enough use out of this thing to justify creating a whole new one. Now let's hop over to Fusion, and I will show you all the other stuff. So here we go. Here's my model. As you can see, again, this slot right here is way too far up because I was using my original model over here, which marked the front of it. But this is in theory how it was supposed to look, and in theory I was going to finish the legs, finish the frames, and then I was going to make sure this was really nicely, ground polished down, and then hit it with good old Maker black spray paint, and it looked decently nice. That was the idea. Obviously did not happen. These holes, I've got them at what, ½ inch? So I have them at ½ inch right now, and probably something I should have checked. I should have caught rather, because obviously a 3/8 bolt would be let's see, 3, 6, 7, 9 9/16. Yeah, 3/8 bolt is a 9/16 hex head. So 9/16 is obviously, well, I mean, I guess 9/16 is only a 16th more than ½ inch, but it's one of those things that's in decimal form. That's going to be a lot bigger. I mean, noticeably bigger. So I did not save all the copies of what I was looking at, but for the most part, I was looking at stuff like this, where the plate that the Jigsaw rides on, the Jigsaw normally rides on across surfaces, would go in here. So you flip the Jigsaw upside down and it would slot directly into here. And I like that idea of just sliding the Jigsaw from the back into position, because that's a lot easier than the current method I've got here, which is having to remove all these bolts and bolt it back in. So I figured, you know what, if I could just slide this Jigsaw in and out of this jig, that'd make my life a whole lot easier, save me all sorts of time. The problem is that there's a couple different issues here. One, so if we look at this, right, I'm looking at this. This is an inch tall, basically, block of steel that I'm looking at if I would have machined this. Otherwise, I've got to weld this all together. And it's one of these deals. That's a weird size right there. So that's the size that I calculated that I needed for the slide. What the heck should I call that? That piece that I keep on referring to on the Jigsaw that it rides on. The sled. Yeah, I think I'm going to call it the sled. The sled of the Jigsaw, this is what I needed for the sled to be parallel with the top of the plate, right? So this area that's containing it, one of those things, like I said, 0.425 is a weird size of steel, which means that would have to be manufactured and, machined to the correct size. This one is just ½ inch. That's a bit arbitrary. I could have used basically anything here. I just threw ½ inch in for the argument's sake, just until I need it. One of those things. If this was 3/16, even then, the 425 plus 3/16 is another weird size. So the third problem was that I only wanted this to be metal, and then I was going to put a wood plate. I was actually wanted to put a large wood plate around it. Obviously, the thickness of the wood plate would have to interact with this specifically, and then I'd have to have flanges, okay? And then I would need flanges that hold it at the correct place, and then I would also need to obviously screw it down, so I'd have screw holes down into it. So there were a bunch of design not even problems. So it's one of those things, you can live with all that stuff, you can get through all that stuff just fine. It just, at the end of the day, I decided that I wanted to keep this as simple as possible, because this is something I wanted to start using right now. Obviously, it took me 2 weeks, which was a lot longer than I needed to. What just happened with my streaming program? Huh, okay. I guess I dropped some frames. Don't know why I dropped some frames, but I guess we're back now. So anyway, one of those things. This would have taken a good bit of work, and then it would have taken a whole bunch of, extra work to get everything lined up so that I had a perfectly flat surface. You compare that to this, where in theory the bolt heads would have been welded flush with the top. I would have just turned this plate upside down, put the bolt heads down onto my flat plate that I was welding on, and then at that point it would have been the exact, everything would have been flat. Everything would have been flat, and I wouldn't have to worry about it. And then after that, once I had that all in place, looks like I accidentally slid that. There we go. Once I had that all in place, then it was simply a matter of, connecting everything else together. So, point being is that this is probably a better way. I probably would have liked this a lot better, and this is the reason why my hole was off here, because I guessed at this distance right here. I only had, again, this front part for the thing marked, and then I said, okay, well, the saw hole, I'm going to make it, a little bit extra wide, and then I'll just slide it back a little bit. One of those deals, rushing to get a project done, and everything just went off the rails. However, we made it work at the end of the day, and that is what is important, and eventually we will get there. Yeah, so weirdly enough, I am definitely dropping more frames, so if the quality of this is slightly below normal, I apologize, but fortunately we are at the end of this stream because there's not much more to say. I've explained obviously what went wrong with the build and the alternative, which one of the things, again, when I go back to make a better version of this, I probably will go this route just because, I like the idea of just being able to slide the jigsaw into position and use it as opposed to having to bolt it down. There will probably be bolts, I'll probably put bolts back here, just pinning it in place. Actually, no, I take that back. I can't do that. Oh yeah, I guess that was the other problem I had, because I had the sled straight up here. The other problem was actually how to hold the jigsaw in place and keep it from bouncing all over the place, because obviously there's nothing on top of the jigsaw sled to keep it from going upwards. So yeah, that was one of my other problems that I had with this design. But like I said, all that stuff could have been worked through, and I think that would have been nicer. And therefore, when I eventually replace what I have right now, this guy, with a nicer looking one, I probably will go that other route. So, one other thing to mention. Obviously, I left the back open here. I didn't close out the back in the real model because I realized, oh, right, it has a vacuum hose port on the back of it. So, one of these deals where didn't particularly want to deal with that guy. Didn't want to cause any problems there. So, wanted to be able to access the port. Sorry, I am a bit distracted because I keep on getting notifications that I'm dropping frames. So anyway, I guess this is a good time to end the stream. For the rest of today, I will not be able to stream this evening. I don't think. I'm pretty sure I'm booked this evening. However, I'm thinking, because again, this week was quite busy. I don't know if I said that at the beginning of the stream. This week was quite busy, and therefore I don't have as much done on the other projects as I would like. I'm going to try to get some more of that done. However, just to not put too much pressure on myself, we will be doing a scavenging game, Tooth and Tail. We'll be doing a Tooth and Tail stream after lunch, just probably about an hour so I can get some more work done. And then, like I said, if possible, I'll try to stream later on tonight, but I am pretty booked. Otherwise, Sunday should be a bunch of more streams, so look forward to it. Anyway, that is the sum total of everything I need to say. Not entirely a 20-minute outro, but close enough. So, if you've been watching, thank you for watching. And as always, I hope you have a great, wonderful day, afternoon, or evening, wherever you're at in the world, and I will catch you next time.